Hello again, everybody. This is Pastor Tony again, and we're moving to session 3, part 1 of our premarital counseling. And this session is about finances. And once again, the reason we do finances is that it's one of the main sticking points in a lot of relationships. When you start talking about money, it can be a real divider, or it can be a real source of unity. So what I wanted to do is try and help you get started off on the right foot with your finances. And so let's just begin here and start talking about. You may have already done a lot of talking about finances. Some couples don't. Some couples leave it to one person and the other person stays out of it. But I'm going to give you a few suggestions here, and I'm going to invite you to have some conversation about this. And the first conversation is this. I want you to pause this shortly, and you can just look at each other and have this conversation about what you've learned about finances. What were your parents like when it came to finances? Did they teach you anything about money? That's the first thing that I want to talk about. Did your parents teach you anything about money? Were they good with money, or were they not good with money? Would you describe your parents as being prudent, or would you describe your parents as basically being the type that spends everything that comes in the door? Those are big questions to ask, I think, if you're about to get married. You also want to decide which of you, and usually in every relationship, there's one who is a saver and there's one who is a spender primarily. In other words, your genuine or your general bent is towards either saving or spending. So I want you to talk among yourselves and find out which one of you would be more likely to be called the saver, and which one of you would be more likely to be called the spender in the couple. So why don't you take a moment, pause this, and just have that quick conversation, and then we'll come back to this. Okay, now that we've done that, I think that makes things interesting. I want to encourage you to do something. We're going to do this session anyway, but when you have the opportunity, I want to encourage you to take something that we offer as a church community called Financial Peace University. It's not a real university. It's only like a 10, 12-week course, and we offer it here. We don't make any money on it. You're gonna pay for the materials that you're going to be using. It is something that you will use over and over and over again. It's going to make a huge difference. Trust me, make a huge difference in your life. And I want to encourage you to take that course. And this is a little bit of just a precursor to that, just to give you some of the basics that I want you to understand. This is not from Financial Peace University. These are just some basic points that I think you need to know. First thing I want you to understand is that your money is not just a practical issue, it's a spiritual issue. And most people don't get that. They think, no, my money is my money. Well, when we talk about the idea of faith, for example, everything in our lives falls under the sovereignty of God. God's in charge of everything, including our finances. In fact, the Bible said, Jesus talked about this, that no one can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, he'll be devoted to one and despise the other. He says you cannot serve God and money. And some people spend their lives serving money. They make money their God. And I want to just caution you in advance. You want to talk about your values and your priorities in your life, in your marriage. Where does money fit with your priorities? For some people, it's everything. It's the be all and the end all. Every choice is made based on the amassing of money. Well, I want to tell you this. Either you make your money serve you, or you will end up serving your money. And serving your money is not a great way to live your life. So I just want to start with that. The second thing, just as you're preparing to get married, I want you to think about this. Don't merge your finances before the big day, before the wedding, okay? Because here's what happens. When you do that, you never know what might happen, and you create a huge mess just in case, because you're not married yet, and you never know what's going to happen. So I would encourage you, wait, but once you do get married, merge your bank accounts. You become one as a couple, and I want to encourage you to do that. How you handle your money in marriage says a lot about the trust you have for one another. And getting married means merging everything. You become one. It's no longer my money and your money, his money or her money. It's our money. And some people have a real hard time with that. Some people want the safety net afterwards. But when you have a safety net, when you provide that safety net for yourself, what you're basically saying is, just in case this doesn't work. When you go into a marriage thinking, just in case this doesn't work, there's a major issue, trust me. And if you're not willing to entrust your money and everything you own to your future spouse, why are you getting married in the first place? I think that's a question you need to ask each other. It's a serious business, and I think it's really important. If you don't think that you're willing to do that, to say that everything you have is mine and everything I have is yours, I think you need to reconsider whether or not you should be getting married, to be honest with you. It signals that there's not enough trust with the important things, okay? Here's another thing that I think is obvious, but for a lot of people it's not obvious. You need a budget. If you don't have a budget, then really you're not telling your money where to go. And if you're not telling your money where to go, it's just going to leave, okay? This is what happens in a lot of people's lives, in a lot of marriages. They don't have a plan for their money. And so that means as long as they're making money and money's coming in, it's great because they can spend it. When the money stops coming in, all of a sudden they run out and they can't pay their bills. So here's the thing. When you set a budget and you do it in an organized way, in an organized manner, if you don't know how to do that, contact me directly and I will try and help you get set up with a budget. You need to have a budget set up before you're married. So that budget should include things like, what is your income, total income between the both of you? What are your hard expenses, those things that are not going to change? For example, your rent or your mortgage, your utilities, your phone, all of those kinds of things that you have to have. And then you've got your groceries. How much are you going to live on for groceries every week? What is the spending money that you're going to use each week? That's a good question to have as well. Because if you don't decide, if you don't budget that amount, chances are you're going to go way over. And that's the way that it works. It's just what happens. If you carry a bunch of money around in your pocket, you will spend it. And so if you budget that money, and every dollar that comes in should have a place where it should go, whether that is to savings, whether that is to a bill, it should have a name on it. And I want to encourage you to do that with your budget. Learn how to do this. Some of you maybe already got this from your parents. Maybe your parents were good budgeters. Some of you, maybe your parents were not good budgeters. I had to learn this later in life. I wish I had learned this a lot earlier in life. It would have saved me a lot of grief. And frankly, it would have saved me a lot of money. But when we start doing our budgets, here's what happens. And you need to do this together. We need to understand this. When you get married, a separate corporation is now being formed. You're not only a married couple, but you're now a business. You're going into business together. This is your company. And your income is based on what both of you are bringing in or what one of you may be bringing in, depending on whether one is staying home. But you want to make sure that your company is going to make it, is going to survive financially. So sit down together. First of all, work on that budget. The first budget you do is going to take a while to prepare. That's okay. Sit down, plan it out as if you were building your business. Sit down, work it through, make sure you talk about all your expenses. And one good way to do this, for example, is to take a couple of weeks before you start doing this and write down everything you spend money on. Write it down to the penny so that at the end of that couple of weeks, you can total it all up. You'll probably be surprised at how much money you're spending on things like coffee, newspapers, all those kinds of things, the incidentals, lunch, that you're going, oh, well, this is only a couple of bucks. A couple of bucks adds up, and I think you'll be surprised at where your money goes. This will give you a really good idea when you sit down to do your budget of where your money is actually going. And then you can sit down and talk about your priorities. What are your priorities as a married couple for your finances? Are you saving for something? Are you saving for a car? Are you saving for a house? Are you saving, are you trying to pay off student loan? What are you trying to do? You need to sit down, figure that out as a couple, and make a plan for where you're going so that you can actually get there. If you don't make a plan, the guaranteed truth is that you're not going to get anywhere. You need to make a plan. That's part of what a budget is. There will be a lot less conflict in a marriage that is marked by careful financial planning and shared values. If you can figure that out financially before you start, you're going to be in much better shape. Why not start working toward that goal during your engagement by planning your future budget and discussing your common values, what's important to you, what's not important to you. Both of you need to be involved so that one person doesn't feel left out and thinking that the other person is making all of the decisions, okay? So even if there's some vetoes in there, no, I feel very strongly about this, this has got to be in the budget, you need to be able to agree through this. If you don't think you can, if you don't think you can work your way through a budget, you got bigger problems, and we need to talk before you get married. Okay. So here's another challenge for you. Take the one income challenge. Maybe you're thinking about having children down the line. So why don't you look at your expenses now, look at what it's going to cost you to live, and try and do that based on one income. See if you can work that through. See if you can live based on the one income. It will show you a lot down the road. It's amazing what you can do, but what this will teach you, for example, is learning how to trim unnecessary expenses. Because somewhere down the road, life may get hard. Somebody may get laid off. We may end up in a recession. You may end up in difficult financial times for whatever reason. Somebody may get injured. And you may be down to one income, and you may have to survive on less. This little experiment here will show you that you can do this, okay? And it may be a good thing for you to do. A second income, by the way, if you do this little experiment, a second income can be used to pay down debt, to eliminate debt. So you can, while you're doing this experiment, have one income pay all the bills and use that second income and just pound away at that debt. That's one of the things that you really want to do. You want to talk now about what happens when you have children. If you do have children, does the wife want to stay home with the children? That's a great question. Or what are you going to do with the kids? What are the other options that you want to explore for that? What are the costs involved in that? That all needs to be factored into as you begin this, okay? So I want to encourage you to start that process now. Another thing that you want to take into account is this. We want to establish a habit of communicating about finances. So we talked about the initial meeting of planning the budget and organizing the budget and implementing the budget. But after that, you should have regular meetings, whether it's maybe a half an hour once a week, when you sit down and you review how you're doing and you say, hang on a second, okay, we're way over here. What happened? Or it looks like, guys, we're over budgeting on food. We don't need that much money, and we can take that money and put it somewhere else. Don't just leave it and just let that money go. Set it somewhere, put it in savings, put it towards one of your priorities. If you have student loan, for example, pay it off as quickly as you can. And that way you can then move on to another priority, which may be a house, which may be starting your own business, those kinds of things, okay? You want to communicate effectively and regularly about your finances. Think about it. Plan and scheme together about your financial future. And here's a big question for you. And I'm going to invite you to pause the tape after I ask this question, or the video as we ask this question. And I want you to think about this for a minute. Where do you see yourself as a couple in the financial picture in 5 years, or maybe in 10 years? I want you to stop this. I want you to take a few minutes, and I want you to just discuss this. Where do you see yourselves in 5 years? Where will you be living? What will you be doing? And what will be your financial realities at that point? And then think about this. How are you going to get there? Take a few moments and talk about that. Okay, now that we've done that, the next step for you is to work out a plan for handling your money. Okay, so here's the thing. Establishing a budget is easy. Everybody can do that. And you might not think it's easy, but it really is in comparison to executing a budget. Executing a budget is hard. And too often I've seen people who've created a viable budget, but they've never followed through on that budget. It's great on paper, but it's got to work in real life. And this is where that follow-up meeting, those regular meetings need to come into play for all of you. Okay, so make sure that what you're doing is something that is practical, and that's where those reviews come in. that you're actually able to live this out. If you can't live it out, the budget does no good whatsoever. If, for example, you're always over on your phones and you're spending hundreds of dollars on your telephones, well, you need to look at that and figure out, how can we save money on this? I want you to consider this. What really are necessities? And I know these have changed over time. And like when I was married, you really don't want to know what necessities were. I mean, we had orange crates as our dining or living, not dining room tables, but our end tables. We had all kinds of stuff. We had yard sale furniture, all kinds of things like that. It's amazing what you can live without if you really have to. And so I want you to be thinking about what are the real necessities, because be careful about the things that you will borrow to get. There's a huge difference today and yesteryear. If you think about your grandparents or your great-grandparents and when they started out, here's the way they looked at the world. If they couldn't afford to pay cash, they would save for it. And if they couldn't save enough for it, they would just look at each other and say, we don't need that. It's very different today in our easy credit society, because the reality is, you need to know this, banks will give you more money than you can ever possibly pay off in your lifetime. And the reason they will do that is because they know they will make their money on the interest. And even if you never pay the debt off, you're paying interest, you're paying them money, they're going to make their money off of you one way or the other. Okay. And the problem is that a lot of people have so much commercial debt, and all they're doing is they're paying compound interest on that debt. And it just keeps adding up and adding up and adding up and adding up. You can't print money like the government can. So this is why a recommendation from all the financial experts is this: stay out of debt. When you want something, save up money for it. And here's an interesting point that you'll hear if you get into the Financial Peace University course. And you need to know this, that the beauty when you have cash in hand is that people will actually negotiate with you. If you don't have cash and you're paying on credit, you're paying sticker price for everything. But if you have cash, it's amazing how people will drop their prices knowing that you're going to give them money right there on the spot in cash. Okay, money talks. So you want to make sure that you are getting rid of debt as quickly as possible. Make debt your enemy. Okay. In your marriage, make debt the enemy. And there are some things I know you have to borrow for. You have to, like student loan would be one of those things that if you're going to go to school, chances are you're going to have some student debt coming out of that. And to buy a house, you're going to have to probably borrow to buy a house. You will probably have to borrow to buy your first car, but don't borrow to buy the second one. Make sure that you're making payments, pay that car off, continue to make payments to yourself so you're saving enough to buy that next car, okay? Anyway, we can talk about this more in person. I hope we do, but I would encourage you to do that. So the key is get out of debt and stay out of debt. Take advantage of the time if you don't have children now. Take advantage of the time when you have no children and you have two incomes to not spend more, but establish an aggressive payment schedule. Look at something called the debt snowball. If you want to talk to me about that, please message me and we can get into that discussion. A debt snowball, well, it's what I use personally to get out of our debt, or our family used to get out of our debt. It was so helpful to us. So many of our people that we've worked with have gone through that. Some have paid off tens of thousands of dollars using this vehicle, the debt snowball, to get rid of debt so that you can then take charge of your finances and you can start earning income on your money, on your savings, and rather than spending money in giving away money on compound interest, you can make compound interest on the money that is in the bank for you. Okay, so just as we wrap up this session on finances, I want to talk about this. I want to encourage you to cultivate a generous heart. And what I mean by that is, if you wait until you think you have enough to start giving, the reality is you'll never give. So as you begin your marriage and you talk about your priorities, make sure that one of the things that you talk about is this: you want to give back. I remember when my wife and I were getting married, we talked about this, and we wanted to be able to help people who needed it. We wanted to be faithful to our church. That's one of our priorities. We wanted to give back to God. God's been great to us. We wanted to be faithful in that. And so we support our church, but we also wanted to be generous with other people. And so if you take the financial peace course, you'll hear about a lot of different people who, because they became free in their finances, because they have no debt and they're building savings, and so there's freedom that comes from that, and they've actually been able to set money aside that they could actually help others with. Some have used that money in incredible ways, like by, for example, helping someone adopt, who was ready to adopt a child but couldn't afford to do it, who was working through their financial picture and almost there but not quite there. Well, they gave them the money to adopt a child. What a wonderful thing that is to be able to do. Others that I know have used their excess to be able to sponsor children through Compassion Canada, for example. Instead of taking one child, I've seen people take 6 or 7 at a time and sponsor a group of children in the same village. What a huge difference that makes in a child's life. And you know what? They weren't doing that grudgingly. They weren't doing that and saying, wow, this hurts to do this. They were doing this because they said, wow, I get to do this. I get to make a difference. When you are able to take charge of your finances, you have options. And so this goes back to who you are as a couple and what God has called you to do. And I want to encourage you to think about that and talk about that. In fact, I'm going to ask you to pause this for a moment, and I want you to begin to ask this question. If you had an influx of money, all of a sudden, let's say that somebody gave you $500,000. I want you to talk about what you would do with that money and why. I think this will reveal a lot of your values. And so I want to invite you to take a moment, pause this, and talk about that for a few moments. What would you do with that? Okay, now that you've had that conversation, I want to end with a couple of things and a few questions, okay? Here's the first thing that I want to say as we wrap this up. Start now with this, okay? Don't wait until you're married. Don't wait until somebody has the best job, because the reality is that as John Maxwell says, no matter where you are, there you are. You can't start from somewhere else. You have to start from where you are. So I want to encourage you to do this. Start now, and make sure that you're communicating regularly. Sure that you sit down and do the budget. I would suggest that one of you takes the lead on this, and that would probably be the person who you have identified as the saver. Okay? That's the one who's going to be most likely to want to do the budget. But I want both of you to be involved. Both of you take the time, work together on this, and one can prepare it, but I want both of you to have input on this. All right? Now, I want to help you understand this. We live in a very privileged culture. In fact, if you think about it this way, you might not think you have a lot of money, but we are right now some of the wealthiest people in the world at the time in history when there is wealth that is unimaginable at most any other time in the history of the world. So we are richer than most people who have ever lived. Think about it that way. So you need to be able to do this. Okay, you can do this. You can handle your finances, and you're responsible for how you handle your finances. Take charge now when you're younger. Don't look around at what everybody else has. Don't try to keep up with the Joneses. Think about what's important to you. Think about how you should handle your finances and take charge. Here's a couple of things I want you to ask you and to encourage you to ask each other as we go back and forth on this. Some questions, and you can pause this each time if you want to answer these questions. What are first of all, your respective beliefs about credit cards? Stop and talk about that for a minute. All right, next question. Are you bringing any credit card debt into the marriage? Stop and talk about that for a minute. Okay. How soon do you expect to buy a house? There's the next question. All right. What do you believe about receiving financial assistance from parents and grandparents after you've married? When you're going to do that, would you be willing to do that? How are you going to handle that situation if it arises? Stop and ask that question. Okay. What are your lifestyle expectations? Do you want to live well? Are you worried about the trying to keep up with everyone else around you? Do you have a high level expectation of what life's going to be like? Or are you willing to suffer for a while until you can afford to live that way? Do you want to live above your means? Are you willing to live within your means? You need to ask that question of each other before you move forward. All right. Do either of you have student loan debt, and how much? And that's a good question to ask as well. And finally, what are your beliefs and your opinions related to private and public schools and those kinds of things, and whether you're going to have your child in daycare and all that kind of stuff? If you agree that you want to have your child in daycare and private education, how are you going to pay for that stuff? And you need to talk about that as well. All right. That's our finance conversation. In fact, I said this is going to be part A, or part one of session 3, but we actually wrapped it all up in one session. So I just want to encourage you guys to go ahead, do your budget. That's the second part of this. Sit down for a half an hour and begin your budget process. Okay. God bless you guys. Have a great day.